All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to the state of COVID-19 in Texas, the Rio Grande Valley impact. We at Progress Texas wanted to have a conversation about the effect that COVID-19 has had on communities in the Rio Grande Valley and how elected leadership in Texas has mishandled this pandemic, especially in this particular part of Texas. So we're here talking with local RGV organizers about what's going on. To give a little bit of background, in mid-August, the New York Times declared the 5 metropolitan areas on the Texas-Mexico border as having the whole country's highest new COVID-19 infection rates. Today, it still remains one of the hardest hit areas in the nation. As of today, Brownsville, Harlingen is at number 6, and Rio Grande City is at number 7 on the list of the hardest hit areas in the nation, according to the New York Times, with a combined of over 24,000 confirmed cases. Wanted to start out with introducing our panelists. We have Sadie Hernandez, the Digital Community Content Coordinator at United We Dream, Michelle Serrano, the Communication Strategist at Equal Voice Network, RGV, and Joe Colon-Uvalles, Community Organizer and Co-Chair of the City of Brownsville LGBTQ Task Force. And would our panelists also like to introduce themselves and explain to folks a little bit about what you do? We'll start with Sadie.
Hi everyone, my name is Sadie Hernandez. I use pronouns she, her, and I was born and raised here in Brownsville, Texas. I did some community organizing in Austin for a while, but I'm back and I am currently the Digital Community Content Coordinator at the National Office for United We Dream, the largest network of undocumented youth in the country. And so most of my organizing focuses on digital advocacy, pointing out mis and disinformation, and holding people accountable and giving people tools to advocate for themselves online, which has particularly become important during the pandemic.
All right. Gonna jump to Michelle.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michelle Serrano. I also was born in Brownsville, Texas, she, her. I am comm strategist for the RGV Equal Voice Network, which is comprised of 9 different organizations that all focus on different issue topics that affect families in the RGV. A lot of it is legal-based, but some of it is community-based. And for the most part, I work within all these different organizations. They have working groups that focus on 6 different topics of family support. And I help them come up with grassroots plans for contact and communication that's effective. And that has become especially more important now that we're dealing with the pandemic, because so much of the work that we had done in the past was face-to-face interaction, and now it's like learning everything all over again. For a lot of our organizers who, just need to get that additional help for learning, like how do I keep myself safe and also engage the community. So that's what we do, and it's an exciting and busy job.
Great, and Joe?
Hi everybody, buenas tardes. My name is Joe Colon-Uvalles. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a community organizer. I do a little bit of everything. I work as a field manager for Texas Rising over at the Texas Freedom Network, doing civic engagement with college students. I'm also co-chair of the City of Brownsville LGBTQ Task Force, but I'm most known for my drag activism as Queen Beatrix. And so a lot of my work focuses around the LGBTQ community here in the Rio Grande Valley, but also as a resource for other people trying to get into this work and sharing this platform that I have to talk about stuff that's happening in my community in and out of drag.
Thank you. And to round out introductions, I'm Diana Gómez, the Advocacy Manager here at Progress Texas. And we're so excited to have y'all here talking to us. And just to start out on a positive note, wanted to ask each of you, how are you each staying grounded during this pandemic? And what is something that you're each looking forward to?
Well, I can start. I have been staying grounded by just really creating community with a lot of the people here in town. We have this like cool group chat that we're talking about a lot of local politics and ideas for innovating the city without having to go through traditional structures of community organizing. We've also like just getting back in touch with what art means and how art can really send a really strong political message and motivate people to get to action has been a lot of fun. And working at United We Dream just with a cohort of really great people that keep me grounded has been really great for me and has been keeping me going through this pandemic, especially advocating for the undocumented families, not only here in South Texas, but across the nation.
Wonderful.
Well, I guess I'll go next. Sorry. A lot of the stuff that is keeping me grounded is just this pandemic has really kind of, I guess, made us all just sort of sit with ourselves at home, right? And really just sort of coming back to like, what are the things that I'm more passionate about? Reading, doing a lot of reading, and then just trying to find the things that bring me joy, you know? So whether it's just me time, whether it is just like playing video games or also a lot of Drag Race TV, just sort of like getting lost in that a little bit, but also just like Sadie, connecting community. This task force that we were able to create with the city of Brownsville, it's something new starting this year, and for me that's been really good because we've been able to continue to like have meetings digitally and just sort of trying to vision what we want for the city of Brownsville and the future of the Rio Grande Valley in terms of our queer community down here. I think that's really important to continue to have something to look forward to. And so being able to connect with other queer people in that way, sort of start building things in tandem with our city officials has been really powerful and really meaningful for me.
That's amazing. How about you, Michelle?
So I've always been a very big music fan, so I've always just listened to music. Music lifts my spirit. So I've just listened to a lot of music, but in addition to that, I've done a lot of cooking, and I adore cooking. I like just go through recipes, and I repeat recipes over and over again to kind of perfect that flavor that I recognize from restaurants that I can't go to because pandemic stuff. And I've really just like been really focusing on creating stuff that I can make myself happy with or my family happy with. So those are like the things that keep me grounded personally at home. At work, we have had this kind of like this consciousness arising from the Black Lives Matter movement and refocusing all of our work and our mission and identifying anti-Blackness and rectifying it and working towards making more just and equitable workspace, even when it comes down to like just, coming up with a new strategy for who we are as a community. A lot of the things that are happening to the RGV, a lot of the policies and a lot of the, the effects derive from anti-Blackness, even though people are like, what are you talking about? It's bigger than that. It's a philosophy, if you will. It's a framework that we have to work out of, because if it affects, a group of people so disproportionately like Black people, then that is a trickle effect. And it also will affect us. And it has been affecting us in our immigration policy. So it's been really reinvigorating to look at it from a new lens and, and be going forth and making sure that we make those changes to better our community, and it's exciting.
Wonderful, thank you. And before I take a deep dive into the questions, want to let folks watching know that if they have questions, they can drop them off into the comment section of this live video. And if we have time near the end, we'll be sure to ask your questions to our panelists. So want to start off with questions about what's happening with COVID in the Rio Grande Valley. So as community organizers on the ground, how have y'all seen this impact affect the RGV? What have y'all seen that's needed most right now? And how have you been able to connect folks with resources?
Well, the first thing that I can think of is the resilience of our community. I think that when our leaders fail us, our gente, we just know how to take care of each other. So I'm just really glad to see a lot of organizations and nonprofits really shift the gear of the work that they're doing. I know here in Brownsville, for example, Brownsville Wellness Coalition, who used to run our farmers market, now is actually doing food drives and working with local farmers to supply food to communities and people in our neighborhoods that really need food. Going out of the way, at some point they're even they were doing contactless deliveries. We've seen, for example, the United Way of Southern Cameron County really focus on, for example, hiring furloughed workers, people who have been without a job because of the pandemic. We've seen, for example, groups like Hentex, Gender Equality Network of Texas, and South Texas Equality Project really sort of emphasize like support groups for the LGBTQ community, finding spaces for queer people to connect and sort of like have conversations about what's really going on, what's going on in their day-to-day lives. So for me, that's like the best thing that's been happening. But obviously a lot of that comes with the fact that like, why do we have to have these resources in the first place? I mean, the Rio Grande Valley is a really underserved part of the state, right? We're one of the poorest parts of the country. So when we talk about like these resources having to even exist in the first place, it comes with the consequence of being neglected for so long. And so we just happen to be very fortunate to have people who are on the ground, who are ready to sort of take up and fill in the gaps of what the state is like not doing for us.
Thank you.
I'll go first, since Sadie. Okay. Well, here's the thing. The RGV is a border community, and we are very unique to the rest of the United States, but not as unique like to other border regions in the southern part of the United States. But like, I'll tell you this: the impacts down here aren't just health; they are job, they are living situation. There are so many cascading effects that have occurred because of the COVID-19 crisis. And it's not like it wasn't documented. It's not like it wasn't something that we weren't aware of. And while we do have resiliency, we should also demand more from our leadership. And what happened was that our leadership chose not to do anything. When we have communities that are mixed status and rely on service industry work, and then we can't work for obvious reasons to stay healthy, those communities suffer. It's the same thing for communities that aren't even, like they may not even be a mixed status household. Like the southern region is a retail-based economy. Can you imagine like just closing almost all retail-based economies except for essential services? That makes a huge impact to the area. And part and parcel to that, all these other militarized efforts to continue at the same time. Like we've been under attack by this administration. We've been under attack by the state administration and the federal administration to the point where they're taking advantage of the situation where we can't fight because we're trying to keep ourselves safe. So yeah, like when the border wall like gets steamrolled through because we can't go out and practice our First Amendment right, to protest, or when the state of Texas decides to open up and make people go back to work and like don't extend something like maybe safety from being evicted. Like, how are parents supposed to take care of their kids? You know, like, there's a lot of factors there that, while affect the country nationally, like, disproportionately affect us. And constantly being left into the shadows and left behind and on the fringes, it's just something that's a frustrating situation. And yeah, we're affected, super affected.
Yeah, and going off of that, I think what really, like, social justice wise and talking about advocating for ourselves and this work, is that this pandemic and the leadership in Texas and our local leadership has really failed us. But the way that the pandemic is affecting us economically, familial wise, with our healthcare access, and the way people, make a living, it also is not only, hurting us now, but it's really highlighting the way that the state has failed us throughout all of this, even before the pandemic. The gaps in our, economic well-being, being a working class community, we were getting by. But in the instance of these emergencies, like, if you're a working class person, you don't have the means to have, like, a large savings account to float you through. We saw the delays in the unemployment and the way that rich people are fighting over, what working class people, what they deem as deservable and who gets what. And just access to healthcare, and talking about, pre-existing conditions, who is vulnerable in these communities, and why we're vulnerable when we talk about, the environmental racism, and that has affected our health, the way lack of access to healthy food is down here, and how that has affected our health, diabetes, and all of these things that are just exacerbated during this pandemic. So it's not even, it is definitely about highlighting the way that we have been hurt now, but it just shows that this was a long-term issue systemically that has been hurting us. And we deserve access to all of these things. We deserve access to education, thinking about all of the people throughout the valley who don't have, Wi-Fi and internet at home, or thinking about the students who have to go to school and they have to all share one device, and the way that the schools and the people in the local level, like, it just shows, like, where people's priorities are at, and it's definitely not with working class people, and especially not immigrants.
Thank you.
And I just want to quickly add, for example, when we think about the stimulus checks that were supposed to come to everybody, we have a lot of people in our community who are undocumented or have mixed set of families. So people who may have potentially really benefited from those kind of resources didn't get that resource at all. And there are even people who I know who just would qualify, who just have not seen that money anywhere, right? And so it's like that money really could have gone a long way when we think about testing resources for COVID. Here in Brownsville, for example, I live in downtown Brownsville, which is like really close, like the wall, like the border wall, and like the only testing site for a while was like the sports park, which is halfway across town. When we think about poor, like, this is a working class poor community, like, people, like, if you don't have a car, like, if you don't have the resources to get to the testing site, then you can't get tested. And so it's one of those things where a lot of people in our communities, like we say, se la rifan, we really just kind of like play it by ear. Like, we have a tendency, because of our culture, to like postpone getting treatment or getting tested if we are sick. And so some of those things have really been at the consequence of, again, years of neglect and like years of not being able to even have, like, for example, in Brownsville, we don't have public hospitals. We have privatized hospitals. I think in the whole valley, we don't have public hospitals. So it's just a lot of stuff that just this pandemic, just like Sadie and Michelle have said, like, it's like turned the volume up times 100 and made it really challenging for our communities to get the help that they need.
Thank you, Joe. And I think that is a great point y'all are bringing up about this large immigrant community that's in the valley. That's a big part of the valley. And speaking of this community, a lot of folks who aren't familiar with the Rio Grande Valley don't know that it's one of the sections of Texas that shares a border with Mexico, and it holds bridges and checkpoints and other crossings where folks from all over the world come seeking asylum. So would you guys mind expanding a little bit more on what the situation is like for these folks, not only the immigrant community already in the Rio Grande Valley, but for those immigrant communities that are trying to seek asylum? How's COVID impacted these communities?
I'll share that there's three important groups here that I want to touch on. There are immigrants that are maybe in Matamoros right now, or Reynosa, or all across these border towns in Mexico that are patiently waiting to have their asylum claim reviewed. And those reviews are going through like what is essentially a kangaroo court. And then recently with the CDC creating or invoking an old rule having to do with disease control, that in itself has basically eliminated all asylum. Asylum does not exist as we know it today. So those people have been camped out by the river for many, like more than a year already waiting. And it's just been like, it started with zero tolerance, and now it's just basically like, can't come in, pandemic, you guys must have disease, which is super racist, you know, and old tropes about immigrants that have been continued since, you know, the days of yore. And that's one group that's affected. An additional group would be the folks that are in detention right now. And this is something that we're seeing all across the nation, and it's the same for us here. Many vulnerable people whose only crime is to migrate, which is not a crime. Migration is a human right, are in detention right now. Almost half of those people are Black. A lot of people don't think about those things, but there's just so much messed up demographic if you like really analyze it. And they're all asking for some sort of asylum, and they're not getting it. They're not getting adequate health care. ICE is notorious for not giving adequate health care. Just look at the previous record from like the very first children who died in their care to now. ICE does not prioritize health care. They are not healthcare administrators. They wait for the very last second to administer health care to people at hospitals in the emergency room, and then place so much pressure on healthcare administrators to wrap it up so they can take them back and torture them some more in jail, you know, and that's hard. It's hard to be advocating for them. And just so for everybody that knows right now, we are running a fundraiser for those who are in detention. It's called Outside Communities for Inside Communities. You can find it on our website and our Facebook and our Instagram and you just go to our Instagram at RGV Equal Voice and click on the bio, and you can donate to the commissary fund so they can get antibacterial and masks and all the stuff they need. And the last group is our mixed status group. And our mixed status group is basically our home. The RGV is a community of immigrants and have done so much to support this community. A report just came out the other day that says immigrants do so much for the economy of the RGV. And not just that, but like support all like these other economies that come down here and you know think, oh, it's so cheap to be here, you know? Nobody, I could just go on, but this community, this area is exploited in every damn way. And it's frustrating to watch. And it's more so frustrating to understand that we have a collective power, but so many are afraid right now because of the constant attacks that we've received from the administration. It's horrible. I'll cut it off there.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, and you know, United We Dream primarily, our main advocacy work is around immigrant youth. And so throughout this entire pandemic, we have seen that mixed status families, but particularly just undocumented families, don't have access to testing because of ID laws. There are places where even here in Brownsville, you can't get COVID testing unless you present a state ID, and that already limits access to testing. On top of limiting access to healthcare, if you're undocumented, oftentimes you get turned away at medical facilities. And this also goes to show how ICE and CBP, DHS, and the deportation force impact the Valley community as a whole. When we talk about over-militarization and mass surveillance of our community, simply because of undocumented people, immigrants, and mixed status families, we not only have police presence, we have ICE presence, CBP presence. And when we talk about COVID and policing and surveillance, the way that we have laws and shelter in place and things like that, criminalizing people especially hurts immigrants, because criminalizing people leads to over-policing of people who have been already over-policed. So like Michelle had mentioned, majority of the people in detention are Black. Here in the Rio Grande Valley in Hidalgo County, we recently had a death because of police brutality and because of lack of access to healthcare. Jorge Gonzalez was an undocumented man who was hanging out at his friend's house, and the police came to enforce the shelter-in-place law, and they ended up killing him. They stood on his neck, and he had to go to the hospital. And when he went to the hospital, he was denied care for being undocumented. And so that shows how over-policing, but also the medical industrial complex, are not built for undocumented communities. And these are things that we think about. Everyone's like shelter in place. But when we talk about who is enforcing what laws and what accountability looks like, during this time of COVID, in an over-policed, over-militarized community, accountability from the state looks like death. It looks like criminalization. If they aren't violent to you on the outside, then you are going to end up in a detention center where you will be severely neglected. There are no social distancing health guidelines in there. We have seen all across the country, even here, the way that people are treated for religious reasons. In Port Isabel, when they were feeding a Muslim person incarcerated by ICE pork, they were not, like, they're neglecting people, especially undocumented immigrants, and then facing all of this, the face and the threat of deportation 24/7 for simply being out and hanging out with your friends during a pandemic. Like, that means death for undocumented communities. And the over-policing and the way that coronavirus has really amped this up has also hurt immigrant communities. And then in the larger whole, talking about the second wave of rising of the Black Lives Matter movement and the way that brought out the xenophobia and the racism of people here in the Valley. And that's all to say that the state has failed us. And when I mean the state, I mean all forms of government control. And that is why, people are rising up and coming together, like immigrants are helping each other, like mutual aid net efforts, and caring for each other, talking about, like what Joe mentioned, like we have to feed ourselves. We have to, share our means among ourselves, because the state is not going to do that for us. And so, being an immigrant under Corona has been really painful, and it hurts everybody in the community, but especially those who are already marginalized and over-policed.
I just want to quickly add, for folks who want to know exactly what's happening in these migrant camps, if you go to YouTube, asylum seekers are pretty much creating video content online, talking about the conditions they're living in Matamoros at these migrant camps. I believe the channel is called Migrant Camp News Matamoros. Deaconess Cindy Johnson, a bunch of other people like her who are involved in groups like Angry Tias and Abuelas. Like, they are the ones that are really, going out of the way to go to Matamoros to provide resources to asylum seekers, because essentially now they're being, again, because of MPP, they're being forced to wait in these inhumane conditions. And now because of COVID, their cases are not being even heard. And so it's really hard for them to maintain social distancing and take care of themselves during this pandemic, and because of the conditions that they're living in. So I really encourage folks, again, to go to that YouTube channel, Migrant Camp News Matamoros, and see for yourself what people are going through. and just realize that there's a lot of stuff that we can do on our end to not only support the work that amazing folks again like Deaconess Cindy Johnson are doing with asylum seekers, but also like on our end, right? Like as people in this country who are witnessing this happen. I mean, like Sadie said, this case of Jorge here in the Valley, like that should not have happened, right? Arbitrarily, we're seeing this policing of these policies, right, in the U.S. for like making sure people are following through with the shelter-in-place orders, but at the same time, we have a lot of very privileged people, for example, at South Padre Island, just like not really caring. Business owners opening up their businesses and throwing parties and boat parties or whatever, and just flaunting it in our faces that they really just don't care about what's happening. And so even within our communities, we see those disparities and we see the differences in how those people aren't really being policed and those people aren't really being pursued. Meanwhile, over here, someone else is basically being killed simply because they went over to a friend's house. And the police, or I think it was the sheriff's department, decided to enforce that policy, and it's just like that doesn't make any sense. So,
thank you so much, Joe, and thank you to all of you for giving us all this information as to what's happening on the ground in the Rio Grande Valley, and to all of those amazing resources y'all have just shared for folks who would want to support. A lot of you have already brought up this theme of failed leadership, right? So, let's get into it. Also wanting to remind folks that if you have any questions, feel free to drop them off in the comment section of this live video. So, what were local leaders doing in the Rio Grande Valley before Governor Abbott rushed to reopen Texas? And what are they doing now? How has this reopening, impacted the community? And can you describe more about who is this failed leadership?
I'm ready to answer this.
All right.
So the beginning of the pandemic was not very, very fun. So like I had mentioned earlier, a bulk of my work, or actually I feel like at this point, all my work has transformed in the digital space and talking about misinformation, disinformation, because during this time of 2020 and then even before and after Corona came, like people get their information online. So when this was coming up, people were asking a lot of questions from the city, like, what is COVID? How do I how is it going to impact me? What should I do to take precaution? And during this time, I understand everybody was getting new information. There was a lot of things going on. However, it just felt like the local city of Brownsville leadership was just kind of very passive about it. And so they had this website that hadn't been updated in, I think, about a week at the time. And so as a resident, just a regular resident, I tried calling the city officials saying, hey, it's been over a week. There's a lot of news that has, come. There are a lot of CDC updates, and I don't see these updates reflected on the website, which was super basic because if you're from Brownsville, the city of Brownsville isn't one to model the ways of communication of bigger cities. It's not like, oh, press release, oh, we're going to go out and talk to our community members. We have this really cool congressperson that's going to come to the city and talk to people. No, if you're in Brownsville and you want information about the city, you need to go on their Facebook page, point blank. Facebook page had not been updated either. And so as a regular person, I was trying to, call city leadership, hey, I'm a concerned citizen, I want answers. And they all really just brushed me off. Come to find out that their also city contact page had not been updated either. They had a phone number for the mayor's office, and it turns out that he doesn't have a physical office or a phone to call. And so just being a person trying to get basic information was just not happening here in Brownsville. And that is as someone who was actively trying to get this information. And being if you're a working class person, you work 40 hours a week, and you come home and you see that the CDC page was updated a week ago, you're not going to think twice about it, and you're going to go with that information when it's not updated and they weren't giving us the correct information. But then it went as far as the mayor, kind of trying to throw shade and be really rude to people during the first initial press conference around Corona. People are complaining to me, kind of acting as if concerned citizens were a burden to him. When it came to a pandemic, people don't face pandemics every day. So not only were they not updating people with information at the beginning, which is where the like height of the panic was, but also like they were being rude to people. Like instead of holding themselves accountable and saying, you know what, we could go faster, let me tell my staff that they need to update it every day. Instead they said, well, LOL, how did you try calling me? And it was just like really rude. And again, just like access to information, even right now, like they keep flip-flopping back and forth from, oh, we have a curfew, oh, we don't. And again, if you're not checking their Facebook page, which isn't really updated as much as I personally think it should be, you know, you're not going to get this information. And so lack of access to information has just allowed disinformation on places like Facebook to spiral, where if you go out in Brownsville right now, it looks like there's not a pandemic. People finally started wearing masks, but it took a really long time for them to finally get used to it. And we're still kind of facing this confusion. People who are getting tested, my whole family ended up getting corona because they work in the service industry. And even trying to get information on where to get tested and what you need was not really that accessible. It was on different kinds of Facebook pages. They would post like a really pixelated graphic that you couldn't really read the details. And so they aren't doing their part in actively trying to get this information out. I will give them credit though. After a while, they did start posting these really cool graphics of numbers of like how many people got the virus, how many people in town have recovered and stuff. I love those. But everything else has not really been accessible enough, or as it should be. And that's not even getting into like language accessibility or people who have disabilities who, you know, probably, you know, you can't see the TV screen. You don't have time to go through all these different Facebook pages. Your caretaker, what if they don't know English, and everything in the Brownsville Facebook page is in English? Like so many things that they're not taking into account, because in their reality, everyone has access to their little iPad where they're going to go on their, you know, really nice Wi-Fi to check the Facebook page in Brownsville. And that's not the reality for a majority of people here. And it was just a lot of failed leadership, being rude to your constituents, not giving them access. And that was like my personal experience with the city. There was one positive out of all of it, and it's been like 6-7 months. And it's just, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like there was a lot of stuff happening at the same time for our city officials. So it was a little disappointing to see at first. Like Sadie said, I remember specifically with other organizers in the community being like, why are they not sharing information in Spanish? Like it would just seem like a logical next step to just share those resources at the beginning in both English and Spanish. But I think after a while they did get the hang of it, and they were starting to put information in Spanish. I think even for some of the press conferences, they started even doing ASL interpretation, just because that was also something that obviously was very much needed for people in our community. But this was like across the board, not just in Brownsville, but across the Rio Grande Valley. Like it was just people in leadership positions. I don't think were really 100% ready, or they claimed not to have like a plan on how to like execute these kind of strategies to control public health and make sure that people were staying safe. And it was really disappointing to see, because it just sort of made it easy for people who just didn't want to buy into the situation to just sort of be really dismissive about it. And so ultimately that came at the consequence of, I mean, when we first heard of the first cases of COVID here in Brownsville, there were wealthy people who had gone on trips to Europe, who were coming into town and just not really caring and just going out and about. And then they got themselves, they were sick, they got their families sick. And unfortunately, it just started like going around. And so at the same time, I mean, when we think about data and numbers and information, now they're a lot better about it. A lot of the cities are a lot better about it, especially at the county level. But I think about rgvcovid19info.com, which is a website that was put up by like just organizers or people just in the community who were just like, who are all about data, to put that out there so people could like have a visual representation of what these numbers look like. But again, now we see the city and now we see our counties putting up this data and this information. And ultimately, also just to what Sadie said, like a lot of these shelter-in-place orders and curfews, like, you know, it seemed for a while that they were pretty much being enforced, and then people were kind of getting the hang of it, and then came Abbott, and who said pretty much like, no, like, just kidding, we're going to do whatever I say. And it really just threw, our leadership, who was already trying to make the best of the situation, sort of just even fumble even more. And that's, I think, the part that's even more frustrating, because it really does start at the top, right? It's just and it trickles down, and it makes it hard for people in power to sort of do the best that they can to help the community. And that was like the main argument a lot of people you would see online with the ordinances and these curfews. It's like, well, the county is saying that they have a curfew, but it doesn't really matter because Abbott said this is like, it always came back to like Greg Abbott. And so I think that's been really it's been really frustrating to see, because Greg Abbott has been more reactionary than proactive about this pandemic. And so and then on top of that, right, so not only how do we been dealing with COVID-19, then we got hit by Hurricane Hannah, and that just exacerbated the situation even more. And it made it even more frustrating, because people were just without water and electricity for like weeks. People's houses were destroyed. And this is just a Category 1 hurricane. And I can't imagine what would have been the outcome of Hurricane Hannah if it had been any stronger. And so luckily we have groups like the RGB Mutual Aid who came in, organized themselves and got themselves together to provide help and resources to people across the Rio Grande Valley, not just Hurricane Hannah, but also for people who needed help because of COVID-19. And so it's just been really disappointing to see this leadership sort of undermine the work that our leadership had been trying to do as best as they could. And it just sort of really threw everybody under the bus. And it pretty much made it seem where like, well, it doesn't matter what your local leadership says anyways, when Abbott has the last say.
Thanks, Jose. Michelle?
So I'll say that poop rolls downhill. So let's start from the top, right? Which is at the federal level, we have many federally appointed leaders across different health organizations. And I remember in February, Alex Azar, the secretary for the Department of Health and Human Services, did a quick press conference. I'd already been hearing about this weird disease that's happening in China. Like I'd heard about it as far back as December. I had heard reports on that. But he went on and he did his thing when he was like, there's nothing to worry about. Don't wear a mask. Like that's not important. And that's where it started to happen. All this misinformation began. Who knows if they were directed to like downplay the information, or maybe they just didn't care about it. We'll never know in the end, but it was definitely mismanaged from the top down. And a lot of times, a lot of these small cities and counties really do rely on the leadership of national healthcare organizations to lay the law of the land. Hey, this is going to get you sick, so these are the things that you can do for it. There wasn't enough information out there for it, and they were telling them not to worry about it. So it got downplayed for at least another month, and then when it started to really affect people, like the damage was done. Like people were getting infected everywhere, and the information still wasn't clear. People were still sure that the way that you got it was definitely through touching something that had germs on it, and it was more than that. So definitely nationally, we had some crazy mismanagement. Locally, our healthcare administrators were convening and having their meetings, and I was a part of a few calls in our health working group for our GVDVM, where a lot of community health organizations were like, we're just going to have to shut her up. We have to close because we don't have PPE. A lot of the community who is too, like, they don't have the resources to like go to a private practice. They rely on those places. So like it was even worse. And yeah, that there was conversation there with county officials, and they did the right thing by acting and creating these stay-at-home orders before Abbott intervened. Abbott talked about it. I mean, likely on the urgings of top-level executive management, his boss over at Washington, D.C. but regardless of me emoting all this energy against them, they messed up. They royally messed up. And what's more, healthcare access, resources, infrastructure down here, our lack of, has been documented, well documented. But because we are an economy that relies on capital interests, it doesn't matter whether or not people are helped. What matters is to make money. And since the RGV is not a place where, you know, we have a lot of political power, we're not going to be able to say, hey, you know, like, Mr. Abbott, please don't reopen, you know, like, and like, we're the general populace. We have to understand across the world, the general well, let's talk about America. Across America, based off of American philosophy of individualism, we're like babies, and we need to be told what we can and can't do. We literally need that guidance because, believe it or not, a lot of Americans think that the government is going to take care of them. And that's not always the case. We saw that. This is exactly what happened when what they applied was a traditional laissez-faire approach, which what they've done forever for American exceptionalism, which is like, we're putting it on you to take care of yourself. And that's just impossible. And I would look at places in like the East Asian countries that, you know, already made the measures to wear masks. And that failed so miserably over here. And a lot of it has to do with xenophobia again. A lot of it has to do with a misunderstanding of, you know, like what it is to care for other people. Some people just say like, no, I don't care for anybody else. It's just me. And that's again, you know, poop rolls downhill. Like if the top is telling you, you know, I only care about, you know, making sure you have your freedoms, and those freedoms are inherently selfish freedoms, then like you're not going to get anywhere. And it's very troubling because it affects our economy. To be selfish will affect our economy further than to take the proper measures and make those changes ahead of time. So while counties and cities were collaborating to try to mitigate whatever damage they could, it's really just impossible in the end when you have state officials like Governor Abbott and all of his little administration, and Trump and all of his administration giving different information. It's just impossible. So now here we are. Trump finally wore a mask. People are finally thinking it's patriotic, but like we're still in like this period of upheaval. And the only way that we can possibly fix this and change this is that we need to get our bodies into the voting booth, or, you know, fill out the form and do the mail-in if you can, and just, you know, make it so like next year we can go back to some semblance of normalcy, because normalcy will not happen so long as we have people who cannot agree on a plan ahead of time, which is what happened. We need leadership, not crazy kangaroo, let's just kick it and see where it lands, I'll just fly through it all kind of attitude. We need real leadership.
Thank you, Michelle. Definitely. You mentioned the ballot box coming up. There is a huge election coming up, if folks haven't heard. And I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit more about that. I think something that's really great is that progressives are building power in the Rio Grande Valley and are building more and more power with each election. And each of you as activists in the RGV are a huge part of that. There are now 40 days left for folks to register to vote as of today. How do we continue to build this progressive power? How are y'all spreading the word to your friends and family? And can you let us know how folks can get involved?
Well, I'll go ahead and start on this one. So over at Texas Rising, what we're doing is we're working with young people across the state of Texas, but, you know, especially here in the Rio Grande Valley, you know, traditionally we have been always in the field, you know, at universities, at events, just meeting people face to face, but obviously that is not something that we're able to do at this moment. So we're doing a lot of phone banking, text banking, reaching out people through digital organizing, and making sure that we're getting the word out about making voting accessible for people. I mean, it's one of those things where there are a lot of people who are very disenchanted with what our options are, and that's just being brutally honest about the situation. But at the same time, there's just too much on the line. There's just too much on the line for us to not even vote, and it's really going to be one of those things where we have to do our best to make sure that not only ourselves, that we're registered to vote, that our friends are registered to vote, that our families are registered to vote. If you go to txrising.org/register, you can register to vote. You can pre-fill out a form, and you will receive a voter registration form in the mail with paid postage. All you have to do is sign it and send it to your county officials, and you're registered to vote. And obviously, because our postal service is now under attack by the Trump administration, we want to make sure that we are able to do that as soon as we can, because we know that there are delays in delivery of mail. And so we want to make sure that we can get as many young people registered to vote, and that you have a plan to vote, right? And call your county offices or go to your county. If your county elections office doesn't have a plan for safe voting, then you need to make sure that you go. Now more than ever, county commission meetings are so much more accessible through stuff like Zoom, or just even calling in. Like, if you can do that and advocate for curbside voting to make sure that people have PPE, that our poll workers are safe, and that, like, if you are a young person, if you are able to, and if you are healthy enough to be able to be a poll worker, that you sign up to be a poll worker as well, because that is really important. A lot of the people that are poll workers are people who are at the highest risk. We have our older population who are poll workers. So we need our young people to really, it's a paid gig. So if you want to make extra money, the county will pay you to be a poll worker. Save up for Christmas or whatever, just do whatever you can, and think about what you can do as a person to make sure that we are not in this situation anymore, and that we are really looking out for each other. And I know it seems really disenchanting. Electoral politics can be really disenchanting for people right now, but it's really one of the best ways we can get things done. And it's really one of the best ways we can make change happen from the top to the bottom. And it's one of those things that it's going to be now or never, people. Monday, October 4th, I believe, is the deadline for folks to register to vote. So please go to txrising.org/register, fill out a form. We'll send you your voter registration card. You just sign it, paid postage. You don't have to pay for postage. We'll take care of that for you. It's super important, and that's the best I can say is just do it. Please do it. We're on behalf of everybody here in the Rio Grande Valley, we're begging you, please register to vote. As a person, as a personal, I'm asking you to please register to vote. Vote, make a plan to vote, and make sure that your family has a plan to vote. Here in Cameron County in Brownsville, we have curbside voting. You don't even have to get off your car. Just pull up to the polling location, show your ID, and you can vote. So it doesn't get any easier than that, and I really hope that people take that into consideration.
Yeah, I curbside voted. It was super easy. But yes, so definitely go out to vote. And when you're in the voting booth, I implore you to think about your local elections and what that means for immigrants and people in your community who have lost their right to vote, and how important it is that when you cast your ballot that you have all of these people in mind. Yes, it's a presidential year. Sadly, we can't vote Governor Abbott out this year, right? It is a presidential year, but that is not the only important election going on. When we talk about advocating for immigrants, advocating in defunding the police and defunding ICE and CBP, that is who your local House and Senate reps are. Like, we have a Senate race this year, and the Senate is Republican controlled, and that goes a lot to the attacks and the attacks on immigrants and the funding of ICE and CBP. When we talk about your local elections, your sheriff, your mayor, your local, all of your local offices have a more direct impact in your daily life than who the president is. Yes, it's important to vote the president out who has been attacking people throughout his entire administration. However, we have to think locally. But even before we get there, think about your friends and family and the political education that they need and deserve. Like, you can tell people to vote, but if they're getting their information off of Facebook memes that are super pixelated saying that, you know, a certain candidate advocates for policies that we know we don't, like, it is your job to say, hey, here's a link, or hey, here's the actual link to the actual bill to show you that they did not sign on that. And take down disinformation, because there's a lot of disinformation about there about voting. Know who you're getting your information from, because there are a lot of people trying to attack your right to vote because they understand what a critical election year this is. So think about where you're getting your information from, and make sure that when you see disinformation, purposefully wrong information about voting, that you educate your family members, and educate your family members about political education. If they're mad that somebody's getting free college, like, let's unpack that. Or if they're mad that someone's advocating for access to healthcare for undocumented people, like, let's unpack that. So definitely talk to your friends and family, because it is definitely important to vote, but it's also important to educate our community on exactly who to vote for and why it's important.
And very briefly, because I know we're running out of time. If we're talking about police reform, the first person you're going to have to look at is your district attorney. Nobody looks at district attorneys. Nobody even thinks about what district attorneys think, how they like. Look at your district attorney, and see if they're upholding the justice the way that you want it to be held. That I think that gets overlooked a lot. And one final point, because I know very little time. The RGV is a primarily young region, like so many young voters here. So you really are going to have, like, if you want to make an impact, start talking to your young friends, or you're young, you talk to your friends and start talking about voting and registering. A lot of people move. I've seen so many of my younger friends that they move, or they've been hanging out somewhere and they intend on voting, and then they found out, oh no, I can't vote because I missed some deadline or this or that. Make sure that you're registered, that you got your right address taken care of. That needs to be, like, for sure. And I voted in person. I didn't do the curbside. I felt very safe doing it. But there's many ways, there's many options depending on what you're willing to do. You know, always wear that mask if you do decide to go out there. I highly recommend that everybody research the people that they are going to be voting for. There are lots of free websites out there that you can research those people with, and talk to people about, you know, their experiences with those people. I know lots of elected officials that are in Brownsville, for example, that I have had bad experiences with. And I've shared those experiences with other people, and then they can make up their mind. But it's important to share that, because if you don't, then people won't know. And later on, if that person messes up, they can refer to, oh, you know, maybe next time I won't, because I've already heard about this behavior. They just exhibited that behavior. Next time I won't do that. And that's just on the local level, but like apply that for, you know, state as well. You know, like Ted Cruz just yesterday was like saying, oh, well, we've got to maintain the closure of the border more because of health guidances, which is just coded language for, like, it's important for us to do that because we're illegally expelling on you know, children, like, every day. And like, we have to maintain that to keep the numbers for, you know, campaign, I guess. I don't know, just my inference. Just pay attention to what they're saying, because they act like they're acting in your best interest when in reality they're not. In that same breath, Cruz later said something along the lines of like, but when we talk about opening the country nationally, we also have to think about the economy and then health interests. Like, so what is it, brah? Like, what is it? But yeah, think before you vote, and just freaking vote, man. Freaking vote. Talk to somebody. Like, I don't know, you tell me, what do you think? Like, there's lots of different ways to vote, but just do it and make it a culture. Make it a culture.
And vote early.
Thank y'all so much. Another great website to look up information on voting, where to go, what's on your ballot is govotetexas.org. Thank you all so much. Michelle, Joe, Sadie, this was such an amazing conversation. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you not just for being a part of this panel, but also for the amazing work that each of you do down in the Rio Grande Valley. I know we'll keep hearing from y'all and from other progressives in the RGV as we continue to work on flipping Texas blue.
Yes, thank you for having us.